we need to build agentic AI, which is the next evolution from if you know what to do and you've even validated that's the right thing to do based on what you were planning to do, whether you are in retail or you're in financial or you are in any industry. If you know what needs to be done, you've got the answer for that. But that does not drive anything because you still have to do it. And that is the agentic part. So agentic really, if you oversimplify it and cut all the noise and complexity out, it basically is saying that the LLMs really tell you what to do, but if you can build agents, then they can also do that for you.
Welcome to the Success Revenue Podcast, where AI meets leadership and real business impact, from the Middle East to the world. This is the show for leaders navigating how AI is unlocking human impact and reshaping how businesses grow.
We are your host, Ivy Forero, executive leader and speaker, and Haydar Al-Saad, CEO of Nebulous, where businesses build and deploy AI agents. Join us for another conversation on this episode. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Success Revenue Podcast. We're super excited to have everyone on today and talk to our guests. And before we dive in, just a quick reminder, please make sure that you like, subscribe, comment on YouTube, Spotify, app podcast, wherever you might be listening today to help the show out. But like I said, very excited for today's episode as we are speaking to Rajat Kotra, who's a global executive with over 3 decades of experience in helping diverse businesses leverage data and analytics, AI, machine learning, automation, and digital approaches to deliver tangible value. Rajat is also a serial entrepreneur with 3 successful ventures in AI, technology, and energy, as well as a sought-after senior board member and C-suite advisor for companies. He had previous senior executive roles at IBM, including Watson, GE, and Experian. And currently, Rajat is the CEO of SecondBrain.ai and recently Chief Data and AI Officer at Ebesco and Group Director of AI and Data Analytics at Informa Group. In his personal life, Rajat is passionate about several things, including high-altitude trekking in the Himalayas of all places, very cool, fitness, mental health, and meditation. Rajat, it's a pleasure having you on the show today. I'm really excited for today's conversation and the topics that we'll discuss. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Haydar, and thank you, Ivy. I'm good to be here and looking forward to having a discussion about everything AI and anything else you want to know in the business.
Welcome, Rajat. So happy to have you on.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
pleasure.
you.
So Rajat, let's dive right in. And I think maybe to kind of set the stage a little bit, why don't you give us your background, obviously a vast experience across many different companies, fields, and so on. But kind of tell us how you got to where you are today and tell us your current position and what you're doing.
Okay, sure. So, my professional journey has been an exciting one. I actually, when I started working, my first job, I was in a manufacturing company. So I come from an engineering background. I did my electrical and electronics engineering, and then I started working making tractors. So my first job was actually making gearboxes, engines, and differential casings and differentials. Most people don't know, but tractors have differentials. So you can decide, which side of the tractor or the vehicle you want the power to come from, the front or the back.
Yeah.
So these are heavy machines. So I got, my first taste of work life. This was early 90s and very different from how work, is done today. So our work life was about, working every day in the office, on the shop floor, working 9 to 10 hour shifts, working with machines and oil and all kind of stuff, which you can recognize us going in, but you probably can't recognize us coming out of the office. And so this was like hardcore manufacturing and engineering. And I really enjoyed that because, that was my initiation into what has become the mainstay of my career all through, which is how do you continuously improve what you're doing? And, later we got a fancy name for that called transformation. But back in the old days, we used to call it continuous improvement. So my role in the manufacturing company, in the tractor business, was actually computerizing their manufacturing processes. So this was the time, early 90s, when the world was going through industrial automation. So, workers who were actually making these components for, tractors and other equipments, they were no longer required to work much by hand. They had computers controlling their machines. And technically, this is called CNC machine, but basically it's a programmable, chip which automates the whole manufacturing process to a large extent. But still, you need to check the output of that to make sure that it is doing what it is supposed to do. But it's a highly, specialized field, and our focus there was how to keep continuously improving that, because these were significant investments for any company to make. From there, I basically moved on to do quality and re-engineering consulting for some time. Sometimes I look back and say I became a consultant too soon. And those 3 years, I remember, I felt if I had a little more gray hair, I would be probably taken more seriously, even though I make sense, but still, certain amount of gray hair helps. But then, after those 3 years of consulting, I basically, there came a change in my career trajectory where I joined GE Capital in the field of Six Sigma. Now, anybody who's been in industry for 20 years plus definitely knows Six Sigma. And that was the statistical, process and methodology which was used to continuously improve any process you were doing. So I actually got into GE and I was placed in the financial services part of GE called GE Capital. And I was the first black belt they had hired locally in India. And since I came from a complete manufacturing background, it was quite surprising that, they chose me to work in the financial services sector. When I asked the CEO of that business saying, why did you choose me? Because I don't have any financial background. He said, you know what? My whole financial leadership team basically tells me that everything is deal. It's a transaction and there is no process in this. But I want somebody like you to come and tell us that there's process in everything so that we can then continuously, monitor the process, evaluate the progress, and continuously improve that. So what I started doing along with the colleagues which I joined, which joined later, we started really, implementing Six Sigma into the financial services processes. And I did that for 4 years, had a fantastic growth in GE. I became the youngest vice president in GE Capital in India. But then, I was hit by the entrepreneurial bug. So after becoming, vice president in GE Capital very early in my career, I was approached by a VC, a private equity and a VC company, right, who basically wanted to pick, me up and set up new startup. Now, I did evaluate that for 4 or 5 months, but then finally I gave in. And this was US, practically a New York based, PE company. And we set up my first startup in 2002, which was in the field of advanced analytics in credit servicing and receivables management. So 2002, we started the company with about 4 or 5 of us. And I was the founder along with my co-founder. And we grew the company to approximately 1,600 odd people in 4 years' time. And we basically then sold that company to an American multinational group called Aegis. But this company was basically an advanced analytics predictive modeling company where what was really important was that you've got to do credit services and receivables management from non-domestic clients. So the way we were licensed, we had set up a head office in California and our operating center in India. But the way we were licensed is that we could not have any Indian client. We could only have clients outside India. So over the course of 4 years, we developed really good marquee banking, telecom, and retail clients. But I would say 90% of those clients were in the US. I had 2 clients in the UK and 2 in Australia. And the work was highly analytical. So we were building predictive models, in 2002 to decide, how do we leverage the best outcomes given the limited resources we have to do our processing. And then after that, I joined IBM as their chief of transformation in their, global process services business. So think of an outsourcing business which IBM was running, and they were doing technical and product support and customer service and online web help for marquee clients like Apple, Xerox, Intuit, Virgin Media. So I basically joined as leading their transformation office as their VP of transformation, and then started owning a P&L pretty soon. And I ran a P&L of approximately $300 million in 2008 and 9. And then I basically moved into a role for Watson. And it's almost legendary now, but somewhere around 2011, IBM's Watson won the Jeopardy quiz show in the US. And this was the first time a machine beat the top two, most won, quiz experts, for that show. And if any of you know Jeopardy show, the show was really about you are given clues, but you have to guess the question. And this question could be in any field in the world. And this whole thing was televised in the US, and IBM Watson's machine basically won the show. And that became a watershed moment for AI, in the business context. So anyway, once that was done, this was done by the IBM research team. But once that was done, the IBM global CEO then wanted to commercialize it. And there were three big use cases chosen. And I was the one of those three use cases because I had risen up my hand and said, I am running this business and I think we can implement Watson like technology into our business. And our business really was at that time, doing customer support and product and technical support for, global customers. So I actually built the first prototype for IBM Watson for the contact center. And pretty much similar to what you see today in LLM agents. The technology was not LLM because LLMs had not been discovered then, but this was the Watson code. And so I then became the global offering leader for Watson in IBM for my use case and the technical and product support area. Just for reference, the other two use cases which were taken up or selected by IBM Corporate was the cancer research use case, which was worked in the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York. And the second was a financial advisor use case. And ours was, the third one. So anyway, and with that, I formally then came into the world of business AI. And this was 2012. And I've been in that field ever since. I ran digital for IBM for some time, and then basically I moved to the UK in 2018. And at that time, I was running my second startup, really, and that was in the field of renewable energy. I set up a company in 2016, putting up solar panels for commercial establishments. And then when I came to the UK, I was headhunted by Experian to set up their global AI products practice. And after Experian, I joined Informa, which is a fantastic events company. It's the world's biggest events and exhibitions company now. And I joined them in their group, running data and AI globally for them. And then more recently, as you said, Heather, I was the chief data and AI officer for EBSCO, which is a global knowledge content distribution company. And at this moment, for the last almost 1 year now, I am building my third startup, which is Second Brains. And Second Brains is really, doing something which most people have not realized that needs to be done to really make agentic AI work. And we'll speak more about that as we go along. But that's my quick background.
Amazing.
Wow.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's extensive experience across, like you said, what was called continuous improvement back then, transformation today, seeing that kind of through tail over the last 20, 30 years of your career, I think is amazing and lends itself to an exciting conversation that I want to definitely dig into. And so let me ask you one quick question in terms of, and then we'll get into some more deeper topics here, but you kind of transformed in throughout that journey within now into the AI space over the last half decade plus, where your main focus is today. Talk a little bit more about Second Brains and kind of that idea, right, of making agentic AI work. That's something that's near and dear to my heart, as that's the space I operate in as well with my ventures. But I'd love to hear your perspective on that. What does that mean to make it really work, and what's the misconception?
So, what does second brains really mean and where did the concept originate from? I normally say it in this way that, since LLMs have come, the one thing which has become possible for everyone is you can get answers. You can get answers to any kind of questions you have, right? And the quality of answer may differ from which LLM or which product you're using, but you can definitely ask anything you want in one of those foundational model solutions, and you will definitely get answers. But getting an answer for something does not run your business, right? Answers don't run businesses, execution runs businesses. So, of course, the next step which had to be taken, which we are talking about for the last, at least the last 18 months, is that we need to build agentic AI, which is the next evolution from if you know what to do, right? And you've even validated that's the right thing to do based on what you were planning to do. So think of the question as what should I do? And then you get an answer that, okay, this is what you can do in any business context. Whether you are in retail or you are in financial or you are in, any industry. If you know what needs to be done, you've got the answer for that. But that does not drive anything because you still have to do it, right? And that is the agentic part. So agentic really, if you oversimplify it and cut all the noise and complexity out, it basically is saying that the LLMs really tell you what to do, but if you can build agents, then they can also do that for you, right? Now, here is a gap in this whole story. There is a big gap, and the gap is that when you ask a question to an LLM does not really know the context beyond a point. It's been trained on generic data, generic content. You can then, of course, give it some specific content from your company, your industry, your products, but still that will be new information for it. But the LLMs have to then combine the answer with lot of the other context and work within your workflow. That is where agentic is easier said than done, because you can really go into any company and figure out that the kind of work they do, they almost think what they do is unique. It goes back to the whole process engineering and process transformation piece. 30 years back, when we used to do consulting in this area, we used to go and say that, what, I have done financial process consulting in this bank and that bank before. But when you go into a new bank, the response would be, well, we work very differently. Well, what does that difference mean? Right? So agentic second brains was conceived because we realized that you can't just implement LLMs into a business context without process engineering. And this is the piece we have been missing, right? You've got to engineer your existing process, then re engineer it in a way that you can see how the machine and the human will work together. And this whole augmentation piece is not generic, right? An LLM can be generic, but the augmentation of how that workflow will get re engineered using LLMs now has to be done almost process by process. So, second brain comes with the concept of saying you've got to combine process engineering, think of re engineering, along with your foundational models. And then do this in the workflow within the workflow and the process of the company. You don't want another tool in any of the businesses, right? People get excited and they want to implement AI, but when they realize that it's another tool they have to then buy and run and maintain, it doesn't work. So, what Second Brain does, most simply, is that it has built a sandbox platform. You can plug whatever existing content, data, and sources you have within a matter of days. It can run, all the intelligence in the background, and then gets integrated within your existing workflow so that there is no additional tool you are running, but really not just gives you the answers for what you were looking to do, but actually does that for you and reports the results and then continuously measure what the output is. All done specific to your business and your domain. So, by definition, when we started the Second Brain platform, we made a generic platform, but within 1.5 months, we had to pick up specific domains and use cases. So right now, Second Brain platform is ready, but we only have two industry specific solutions available because we had to go inside those solutions, talk to multiple clients, do proof of concepts with them. And that's when the team became confident that now they can almost address every specific nuances in that process for most companies. And those two solutions are, we have Second Brains now for supply chain, and we have Second Brains now for sales and marketing intelligence.
Wow,
And we will
that's
continue
impressive.
going forward. So we will keep on adding specific domain use cases and then launch it in the market. And that
Wow.
is which has been missing.
Mm, yeah. And Raja, I'm curious when it comes down to a mental model that you always return to when aligning AI innovation with like a commercial strategy, especially across multiple markets and cultures. Is there a mental model that you usually use for this?
Yes, I have a very simple mental model. And my mental model, where I work with different companies and different boards and CEOs and the senior executive team, is that you got to figure out, you know, what is your need first. Don't
Mm,
look at AI as a solution looking for a problem. That will never work, right? And I've had this conversation in the last 7, 8 years with quite a few people, more so since LLMs came out, because all this hype was created. And you can see that every CEO or every board now wants to do AI, but they really don't understand that you will not become an AI company, in a matter of months or years. If you were building, if you were selling, shoes, you will still sell shoes. If you were selling bank loans, you will still sell bank loans. The idea is that you got to figure out within your operation processes, where can AI fit? So identify where is your need. And the mental model I always put, in any of this context, in these conversations, is that, remember, you got to figure out what activities machine does better than humans, and which activities in the business process you run, humans have to be fully responsible. While they have to be fully responsible for every decision, but that definitely in every business, every process, there are things which are repetitive in nature, and humans do get, when you have to repeat the same thing again and again, the humans, one, they make mistakes, two, they get bored very quickly, right? But the machines have the opposite effect. The more repetitive task they do, the more data you give to them, they actually get smarter and better. So that's the model to think when you are trying to implement AI in any of your business. Don't just think that you can apply AI anywhere and everywhere. You will still continue to do what you are doing. You will still continue to sell shoes or sell bank loans or sell, cars. But you got to figure out within your process. And that again, I would underscore the process engineering piece. There is no shortcut to this, right?
mhm.
When this hype is going to die down eventually in a matter of months or years, we will come down to the real world and say there is no shortcut to this. You got to figure out within your business processes existing today, which activities, which steps, which workflow items are better suited for machines, and which are suited for humans and machines together, and which you should just leave to humans. This piece of work is very important. And most companies right now are realizing that they haven't yet got to that final, discussion. They are still thinking, well, we can just do AI everywhere and anywhere we want. People like us who've been doing this for years and decades, we sort of bring the realism into the discussion and say, you know what, let's go down to doing it rather than talking about it.
That's so good. Yeah, it almost feels like because AI has become such a buzzword or hype, every company is now calling themselves their X, Y, and Z AI company and whatnot. So that's interesting. And Rajat, with all of this expansive career that you have had, what was the turning point in your career that taught you something that no certification nor MBA could have ever prepared you for?
Well, my real turning point was somewhere in the middle of my first startup. As I told you, right, I was lucky slash unlucky, the way you look at it, the way I sometimes look at it, either ways. that I did my first startup very early in my life. Right, I had approximately 9 years of work experience, and I jumped into the startup world. Right, and my first startup was, I told you, was PE funded startup. And in 2002, the initial investment of setting up that business was $15 million. So it was not small money in 2002. Right? So the real turning point came after starting that startup. I realized that no matter how expert you are, no matter how great a growth you've had in your career, when you are doing a startup, one, you have to do everything yourself.
Mhm.
You no longer can stay in your role, in your boxed boundary, and say, well, I am the chief technology officer, or I am the chief revenue officer, or I am the chief HR officer. It doesn't matter. Titles just stop existing, right? You've got to do everything. So you've got to be a generalist, practically speaking, to really run that business. And secondly, is that, suddenly you realize that guess what? You are the brand, right? Nobody knows your company's name. They only know you. So with that comes a lot of responsibility and a lot of authority as well. But then, that is the biggest learning one can ever have. And that's why I always encourage. For the last almost 12 years now, I have been trying to, give some of my time back to entrepreneurs and startup, incubators and accelerators, so that I can share that learning back, because I can always feel, firsthand, when I meet any startup founder, that what they must be going through, especially if they are young. And I always encourage that that's the best thing you could ever do in your life. Because even if your startup does not become successful, the learning you will get from this is irreplaceable. So that was my turning point, really, and I, sometimes in my not so good days, I look back and think maybe I shouldn't have done that. But then 90% of the time I say, you know what, that was a great experience. It really made me what I am today. So I no longer can blame anyone else for what did not go right. It's all on you, because you are where the buck stops.
That's great. I think that's so interesting and very true. As when you live it and you go through that process once or multiple times, these are the learnings that are so valuable. And Rajat, I'm kind of curious as well. I'd love to kind of piggyback off that a little bit, because as you mentioned, you sat obviously in advisory roles for entrepreneurs and startups while also leading at the C level. How has mentorship shaped your own leadership style and your philosophy around these things? And you said you give back in different things, but how is that, whether that's you had mentors early in your career or currently, or you as a mentor to others, how has that shaped your leadership philosophy?
Oh, well, frankly, a lot. I actually, interestingly, I come from a different cultural background, which is sort of not so Western to begin with, right? But then all my career has been completely multinational slash global, right? My only sort of non-global, experience was my first job, which was the first 3 years, which was pretty much a factory. And, you were going into the factory, making what you were supposed to do and coming out. My second job, which was, a consulting company, was also connected to Apple back in the old days. And of course, my third job was GE Capital. And since then, I've only worked with global multinational companies. But my roots are, sort of in a culture where, we don't call that mentorship. We have a local term for that, which is called gurus. You may or may not have heard that term, but that is very important in that culture, where I come from. So from the beginning, people like me, we always, highly respect advice coming from your mentors. And I've been fortunate, to get mentors early in my life. Sometimes, when you are young, when you are early in your career, they tend to be your direct bosses. But then as you get more experience, you develop your own mentors, which may not even be in your company, but you always go back to them, to advice, for advice and guidance when you need. Now, I strongly value that. And then over the years, like I told you, I have then, for the last 15 years or so, 12 to 15 years, I have started doing that myself for people who value that, right? So the biggest, benefit of mentorship is what I call, that is a no threat space for you. I have worked in cultures which are highly competitive, right? Some experiences I spoke about in big multinational companies. These are very competitive companies, right? You're almost fighting for your space every week, every month, right? Especially as you grow senior, right? And one of the biggest challenges you face is that you really can't ask questions, without the fear of looking stupid or sounding stupid. And that's where mentorship really becomes very, very useful, right? A job of a mentor has to be to listen, and 90% listen and 10% give any guidance or advice. Because most of the time, when I mentor now, I realize that, you know, the kids now, the startup founders now, definitely they seem to know more than me, right? Right. And the world has changed so much, right? When I speak to my son or my daughter, I realize that the way they process information, knowledge, and the environment around them is not the way I used to do it. And I give this fantastic example. I've given it a few times before, is that, my moment of reckoning was in 2011, when my daughter was 4 years old, and she asked me to find something on Google. And, I started typing that. And she told me, why do you type on Google? Don't you know you can speak to it? Now, for someone like me, who's been in the field of analytics and digital almost all my life, I didn't even realize the world had changed. Yeah. 2011, 12, when, kids who were 5, 6 years old then, they actually don't ever type anything on Google. They've never done it. They only ask. And Google then converts the speech to text and does what it's supposed to do. Right? Right? I don't know. When I was young, we had a product in the world called Typing Tutor. I'm sure none of you have heard of it.
No.
Yeah.
Right?
Old school, right there. Yeah.
Yeah. This product was supposed to teach you how to type on your laptop or your, computer, so that you don't waste time. Right? Because, back in the old days when we were young, we had to write emails and we had to make presentations. And if you don't know typing, then you would take that much more longer. And especially if your boss is standing behind you, if you know typing, you'll be very impressive, right? Oh, you know typing, you do so fast, right? You're highly productive. So that's an example of how the world keeps changing, right? Similarly, now if you see, I don't know, but I think my son, who's 25 years old now, he still talks to people. But my daughter only texts. You would be surprised. I am shocked. I see my daughter and kids of that age on the phone all the time, but I never see their phone ringing.
Crazy.
Just text messages. Yeah, that's definitely the case.
Everything is happening without a conversation, verbally. It's all happening in a different world. So that's an example. I see that, startup founders know a lot today, but, at the same time, if you can listen to them and then give them that one or two pieces of, experiential advice, they benefit a lot, right? Technology wise, resources wise, they know a lot. But what you learn from experience has no shortcut to it, right? So most of the times, you don't have to tell them what to do, but you can definitely and should tell them what not to do.
Yeah.
Love that.
Definitely. No, great advice there. And absolutely, the world is constantly changing. Someone with younger kids can definitely relate to that fact of speaking to ChatGPTs and the Googles versus typing. The world is changing. But I think also, like, for taking that to a business level, like you said, it's changing so fast. It's also easy to miss the learnings from the past, right? And I think that's where that mentorship and that experience comes into play, is when you can combine that learning experience with the knowledge and the fast movement of today. That's when you can be really successful. And that's, I think, where the best founders or executives put people around them that can give them both sides of that perspective in different ways. So totally agree with you there, Jat. And one thing I was really curious about, because taking this a little bit in a different direction, back deeper into the AI piece of it. I see this a ton doing what I do with Nebulous, and our listeners have heard me speak about AI and Agentic, and very aligned with what you've kind of talked about so far during this conversation, Rajat, in terms of the approach. And one thing that we see often working with, for us, embedding and working with agentic AI into kind of operational compliance heavy verticals. So we talk about, healthcare clients, insurance, fintech or financial, government, these types of organizations. It is so important to be able to get into their internal systems, these current systems, but that's really hard to do with AI, right? So I am curious kind of how you approach embedding AI into these existing legacy systems at these organizations that have these systems that's very deeply rooted in terms of their workflows and their operations. How do you embed AI into that? And especially when, as we know, a lot of times in these verticals, there's kind of also that cultural resistance to what's new and what can change or augment the current reality. How do you recommend approaching it? How do you do that? How do you kind of get through that barrier of entry there?
Right. Great question, Haydar. So, you know, actually, Second Brain, was formed with that context in mind, as, primarily speaking. And, my hypothesis, because I'm someone, who has tried to solve the same problem which the LLM solved. And I won't take too much time because it'll take some time to explain, because quite a few, it's a fascinating discussion to get into to understand what is the real problem which LLMs really have solved. Because I think there is not a universal and common understanding or simple understanding on that in the industry yet. But so some other time we'll speak about that. But, I am someone who worked and solved that problem to a decent extent even before LLMs ever got discovered. And I'm speaking about the Watson, experience and that model. Watson essentially was, and I can share this quickly anecdote with you that, I always smile when I talk about this, is that, 2011, Apple was one of my major client because I was running a business where I had a big Apple, P&L, business I was running, and they were my main client, right? Even though they were not biggest in terms of revenue, but they were the most marquee client I had. And when I got into the Watson, project, and I became the leader for that project globally, working with the IBM research teams, I made a presentation to introduce IBM Watson. And the presentation used to go like this. I would go on the stage and I would take my iPhone with me and I would ask my iPhone, "Hey Siri." And remember, Siri was just launched, a few months back. I would go on the phone and say, "Hey Siri, can you call me an ambulance?" And Siri's response used to be, "Okay, Mr. Kotra, I will call you Mr. Ambulance from now on." And then I would bring, "This is why you need IBM Watson." Okay, because
Good saying.
understanding the context is key to solving any language problem. Now, that is a fundamental challenge which we have been grappling for a long time in natural language processing. English, is a language where the meaning of the words change based on the context you are coming from or based on the industry you are using it in. So if I go and ask, on Google, not now because LLMs have, solved that problem in a very different way, by the way, than how we were solving it in the Watson code. They are fundamentally different, but it's an evolution of each other. But, before LLMs came, I was able to solve that working with the Watson research team back then, but we did not really commercialize this. But till about 2017, actually, no, till about 2022, if you had gone on Google and asked, "Please tell me what is a driver," right? It would not know whether you are from the automobile industry or you are from the golf background, or you are from the software industry background. Because guess what? The meaning of the driver completely changes in all these three contexts. We all know in automobile, driver is the person who drives it. In software, it's a software driver. In golf, it's an equipment which is used to, tee out or tee up, whatever you call it. So context is so important. So that's what we basically did solve in the LLMs. We were solving it in Watson in a different, model context. But in LLMs, we solved it, using, the LLM architecture, which is primarily a mathematical representation. It still does not understand the meaning much, right? So that's the power of LLM. I just shared that so that we understand, what is LLM, because AIs are much bigger than just a foundational LLM model. But when you go into a company and you start discussing AI with them, today, most of the time, people who are new to this, leaders who are new to this, they only look at AI and think of LLM. Well, that's just one small piece of it, right? But definitely it has had some advantages. So when we was looking at Second Brain and launching it and building it, and that's a journey. I have no plans to make quick money out of Second Brains and feel good about it, because I think we need to solve this problem from an industry perspective, and that can only happen if you do it domain by domain and process by process. There is no general simple answer for that. And guess what? The LLM companies, it's not that they don't know this problem, but they will not be doing the effort needed to solve this company by company, because that's not their business model. They will be focused on selling the LLM as a software unit and making money out of it at scale. They don't have the time, resources, and interest to go into a company and figure out how does LLM work for them. They have no interest in that. So some time back, we started solving this problem, and we even called it Agentic by building LLM wrappers. So you would take an LLM and take a use case and build a wrapper around that and start selling it. That is almost fizzling out now, because that, to your point, is not embedded into the existing processes of the said company where you are trying to implement this. So the way Second Brains actually solves this, like I said, is domain by domain, process by process. Now, specific, to your question you asked, it's not another tool. There are existing tools in the business. You don't want, another new tool to sit alongside all the existing businesses. You know what? The way we are doing this in Second Brains, there's one specific use case of LLMs which people haven't really implemented much, or probably not understood much. What has LLM really solved? LLM has solved that now knowledge can be accessible to everyone within a company, right? Before LLMs or before foundational models, if you were the chief supply officer, or you were the junior most supply clerk, your knowledge level was vastly different, right? But now with LLMs coming in, when we go and implement my Second Brain agent solution in that business, we give them an interface where they have access to the same knowledge. Even the clerk can ask the same question and get the same answer. What the CSO, can ask and get the same answer. So the knowledge differential has been removed in the company. But there's another big use case of that, is that, LLMs can actually talk to all your existing tools and do the hard work of figuring out what is available where and what is not available where, and fill in the gaps for you. So in Second Brains, we use the LLM to basically work alongside all the other tools and be that interface which basically asks all the questions, so that you don't, as a human, you don't do that heavy lifting yourself. And that's the big difference. That's how you are able to embed, your agentic solution into the workflow. And it also helps you not be bothered about 10 other different, specific tools. So for example, in supply chain, the use case we have commercialized now and launched formally, that can work with any of the, procurement solutions, any of your, procurement or supply apps, anything you may have existing, rather than the human interfacing and figuring out what lies where, what information is lying where, and who has the authority, where. The LLM can do all that interrogation for you and we already build that as part of customizing that to that particular company. We build all those connections. So what you need to do now is to not do that stuff yourself as a human. And that goes back to my point saying it's important to figure out what is machine good at and what are humans good at. And this is one thing when you have information lying in 10 different tools, especially if you have implemented, it rarely happens in business that you've implemented a new solution and the old solution is not used anymore. It rarely happens. In technology, in most companies, when you buy a new or you move to the cloud or you buy a new tool, your old tools still exist, right? So you still, rather than replacing, we used to call it rip and replace. That never happens in practice. You are implementing new tools, but your existing tool still stays. So, you started with 2 tools, now you have 20. But in the second brain model, LLMs can actually work with all those 20 tools, removing the need for the human to do all the interfacing. That's a big use case which most companies haven't really got to yet. They still have
Wow.
human, kind of finding information from all the, older tools and then trying to have them coexist with the new tool.
Mm.
I hope
Yeah.
that makes it a bit technical as an answer, but I hope that helps clarify.
Absolutely.
I can see that use case, Rajat. And as a fun fact, actually in the exhibitions event industry, I work for Messe Frankfurt
Mhm.
as the head of customer success, which is a competition to a forma.
Yes.
And I
Yeah.
can see and it's interesting because the exhibition space, like their systems are not as like I come from software, right? So it's like the systems are made for scale and efficiency, and in the event industry is quite differently. So I'm in a position where pitching for AI agents as like an email co-pilot to support exhibitors and whatnot. So I'm pitching different things, but they have all of these legacy systems, and I've become like an AI advocate within my company on how we can just connect all the systems into like a large language model, or so many AI agents and everything. So it's
Yes.
interesting.
Right. And remember,
Yeah.
having an LLM agent be the interface and the connector between all your existing systems is a very good use case for an LLM. That's precisely what we are
Yeah.
doing in Second Brains.
Ma, I love that. And by the way, I love the name of the company, Second Brands. Really, definitely sticks with you in your head. Tell
One
me.
last thing I'll tell you. Why did we call it Second Brains, right? As the founder, I gave the name and I called it Second Brains because working all these years in the industry, and working with so many CXOs, I really, know the need where CEOs and CXOs have questions, but they are afraid to ask in front of their teams. That is where the name Second Brains come from. It's not a second brain because I'm of the school of thought that an AI should never be more powerful than the human brain, right? It will and should never be, but we all can have multiple second brains, customized and personalized to the area of focus or area of interest, whether it is business
Mm.
or it is personal, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There are many things in our business life and our personal life which are repetitive, which we don't need to keep doing every time because by definition we get slower and we make mistakes on that. But this is the exact thing where the machines actually, one, do better, become faster.
I love that.
So
I love that.
it's about having multiple second brains which help you run your life personally and professionally much better.
Yes, we all need that. I need like 3 or 4. I'm a mother. As parents, we need more of those brains.
Yeah.
And Rajat, I'm really curious. In your introduction, in your bio, we learned that you like hiking or trekking and meditating. And I'm just curious, for somebody that has had such an extensive career and it has to analytically be able to solve problems and all of this stuff. What does the balance of your personal life with all of these habits and activities of meditating have done for you in terms of like being able to think or regulate yourself to be able to perform at a state that you need to perform?
Well, they have been invaluable, right? Of course, I did not learn it from my childhood, right? I learned from one of my mentors, the topic we discussed before. I started meditation really in the year 1999. So almost 7 years after I started working. And that has been very helpful for me, exactly to your point. I love sharing stories because I think those are the best ways to get your message across. And I share real life stories. I learned a meditation technique, which was essentially an Indian technique, right? It has been developed and taken all over the world by an Indian guru, but my guru for that technique was an American.
Mm. Oh.
So, yeah, so I do what is called transcendental meditation, and you can Google it up. But I got into that program through my corporate route, and then I stayed with that ever since. My hiking and mountaineering piece is also linked to that in some extent. I was always keen for going to mountains because that seems to be my happy place. I don't know why. Like for my wife, for example, her happy place is on the beach, and mine is not. Right? I just if I have spent so my sense of a holiday is not going on a beach and lying, reading a book, and that is
Mm.
my wife's favorite holiday. So I guess we all are wired differently. So mountains have always been the place where I used to go to holiday when I was young. But as I grew older, I realized that going to the mountains and spending and I go to the mountains in the Himalayas where I do these treks where if you have a 15-day trek, for example, or a 12-day trek, there are at least 8 or 9 days where you don't have mobile connectivity. And and almost all those 8 to 9 days, you also don't have electricity.
Mhm.
So these are things which I have developed over time as my recharge pods and
Mm.
my recharge time. So I try to completely switch off. To your point, Ivy, the corporate lives we have led, right, are definitely highly stressed lives. But
Yeah.
you got to train yourself to say that this is one part of your life. I always coach younger entrepreneurs and people who have grown too fast in life professionally. I always tell them that what you got to look your professional life on a span of 35 years.
Yeah.
There is no way you'll always be climbing. You will have
Mm.
times when you'll have to rest. You will have times, by the way, you'll have to go down, because that's how you climb a mountain. You just don't go one direction. Whenever you are
Mm.
climbing a mountain, you go up, you rest, you go down, then you go up again, right? So
Yeah.
it's a metaphor I use from my real life and say that don't look at your life in a span of 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. Look at it in the larger time scale, and you will realize that we all have to go through ups and downs, right? And when you are down, right, you've got to bring your power which is within you. I sometimes give an example of saying there are two kinds of motivations which you have to live on. One is external motivation, right, and one is internal motivation. If you just depend on external motivation, you will probably not have a very happy and peaceful life. But if you learn the art of how to internally motivate yourself, you will have a much more balanced life.
Mm. I love that.
Excellent. Yeah. And that's great. And that balance is key, I think, for your internal happiness, but also your ability to continue growing and developing and investing more in what you're doing. Awesome, Rajat. So that's super interesting, and I think throughout this conversation, there's just so many insights. It's literally packed with them. And now, as we're getting to the end of our conversation, what we'd like to do is do what we call a rapid fire finish here to our conversation. So we'll give you some quick hitter questions, one sentence answers for the audience to kind of take away from this. So if you are ready for the rapid fire lightning round here, Rajat, we can kick that off.
Sure, that's always a challenge for me because, as you've figured out by now, I'm a very context person.
Yes, so this is it's almost always harder to boil it down to one sentence and one question or one word than giving the context. But we'll give it a try here. Let's see.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, but we'll start with an easy one, maybe given we've had a lot of context so far in this conversation around this, which is
Right.
The biggest opportunity with AI right now is
really, domain context tuned, workflow agents.
yep, great. And the flip side of that, then the biggest risk with AI right now is
Well, the biggest risk is trying to fit square peg in a round hole, trying to look good by
Mhm.
implementing AI so that you can put that in your annual report or in
Yeah.
your PowerPoint slide.
And next up, so let's pretend we have a time machine here and we fast forward 12 months into the future. And then you're sitting there looking back at this past year from that point. What would you like the big headline of that year to be?
Well, like I said before, we have successfully built, process and domain aligned agentic solutions, and we are no longer talking about it. We have some businesses coming and saying, you know what, I have implemented AI agents and they work for me.
Great.
What's one thing you're grateful for right now?
Well, you asked me in the business context. I am grateful for many things in my life. I always, believe in blessings, and I always thank God for, whatever ups and downs I've been through. But I have landed up in a place where I am very grateful for that. But in the business context, I would say I am grateful that what LLMs have brought into the business context is that it has forced everyone to challenge status quo. I told you my background from the beginning has been sort of continuous improvement, which became later known as transformation. But now with LLMs coming in and the AI hype being created, everywhere, transformation is no longer a choice. It's become more like a necessity because most business models will not exist, in the near future if they don't align with the new ways of working using AI. So it's, what you call the fifth or sixth industrial revolution. That time is here now. If you don't do
Wow.
it now, you will no longer exist.
Oof. And what's one word you want this year to be about?
I would say, again, I would break down in business and individual. This year for businesses should be about domain and process tuned agents working in their industry for them. And for an individual, it has to be personalized assistant. And for IV, three assistants to augment, what you want to improve in your daily life, in your personal life. So think of it this way. One last thing I'll say is that, we all love LLMs, but imagine the power of LLM when it starts understanding you as a person. We haven't done that yet. The LLMs we use today have been trained on generally available content on the internet. They have not been trained on a Haydar or an Ivy or a Rajat. If we start spending time training our own LLM agent on us, they can do much more and better. But we haven't yet done that. And we'll start doing that. You will see that in the very near future, you will have apps on your phone which will start to know more about you. Now, the example which we just had a month back, or even lesser than that, the Cloudbot and Moldbot, don't go there because that's a different story altogether, right? But that use case is very powerful. The way it has come out to be may not be the best way of doing it, but that use case is going to happen. We all will start personalizing our own choice of LLMs, and those LLMs will start understanding you as a person, and they can be useful, is my strong view.
Oof, I love that.
Amazing.
Rajat, it's been an amazing conversation. I feel like I've learned so much from all your experience and the way that you view life. So thank you so much for being in the show.
And thank you. I've learned a lot too today, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Our pleasure. Thanks for being on.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Success Revenue Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube, and also give us a 5-star rating on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts to support the show.